Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing good. My name is Pavneet and I am here with you all to basically help you out with a new series that I am planning to launch on my YouTube channel, and this series is basically called The Games Countries Play. The objective here in this kind of a series here is to analyze in a deeper manner certain current affairs on a regular basis that have security and international significance. So the lectures here that I am going to provide you all free of cost are going to help you understand the larger nuances of how the world works, and also how countries play different kind of games to counter each other or to support each other. So we will try to cover these issues on a weekly basis, and every week I will put up one video which is related to one of the most important current issues of that specific week itself. I am the author of this international relations book published by McGraw-Hill Education and the Current Affairs MCQs for Prelim 21 book, and this is my Telegram channel, whereas this is my email ID. In case if you have any doubts, you can always feel free to reach out to me. These are the two courses that I am planning to launch, which is a comprehensive course on international relations. This is basically a course for the general studies, and it starts from 1st of July on the Unacademy Plus, whereas there's a comprehensive course on security issues that will start on 8th of July on the Unacademy Plus. To join these courses, you can also use my code Pavneet10 and get a 10% discount and have access to these enriching classes. There are some free courses that I am also running on for the aspirants as such. There's a monthly current affair workbook course which we already started in the month of June, where I basically analyze news from 6 different newspapers. This is a completely free of course program where the workbook is available on my Telegram channel. The link is here. And at the same time, these classes are available on the Unacademy app. So all that you need to do is download the app, use the code Pavneet10 to access these classes. From the month of July, we'll also start with 4 monthly current affair quizzes, which will also help you to consolidate your monthly current. Again, these will be free of cost, absolutely available on the Unacademy app, can be accessed through my code Pavneet10. On my channel of YouTube here, I am also running a GS core subject quick revision course, which has already started with Modern India, where we make impactful videos and help you revise concepts and facts in less than 10 minutes. And there's also monthly current affairs, which is going on this channel itself for security issues and IR. So without wasting much time, friends, let's get going. The topic for discussion of today's class is basically the changing dynamics of Middle East. I want you to understand this topic because the Middle East is witnessing a kind of a churn, and this churn is basically going to impact not only India but a larger part of the world. So let's try to understand, friends, what the issue is. So Iran has basically elected a new president. This president was the earlier one, Hassan Rouhani. He was basically a moderate. Moderate means a person who basically adopts a very kind of a lenient foreign policy, is not very aggressive. Whereas now, with Ebrahim Raisi as the new president, he is basically known as a hardliner. Hardliner means a person who basically adopts a foreign policy which is hard on certain tones, means that the national interests take primacy over the economic interests. So basically with Ebrahim Raisi now, Iran is going to become the new game changer. It's important, friends, to understand that Iran is a country that matters a lot in the Middle East. And the reason why Iran matters a lot is because there are certain countries which are directly under the influence of Iran. And these countries which are there, they include number 1, Syria. Number 2, they include Lebanon. And number 3, Iraq. I'll explain about all these 3 one by one in the subsequent slides to you. But just keep in mind, number 1, that the Iranians today have a direct influence. Direct influence means that they almost literally try to control these 3 states. So we can also say that there's a kind of a remote controlled regime by Iran here in these 3 states. Whereas, friends, it's important to remember that Iran also plays a very destabilizing role in certain states in the Middle East, which number 1 include Kuwait. Number 2, it includes Bahrain, which is another important Middle Eastern country. And at the same time, number 3, Yemen. I will explain about Yemen again after some time. And very importantly, friends, it's very surprising to you also, Iran plays a very important role even in the Gaza Strip. I'll talk about it in the subsequent slides. So please remember that, Iran has witnessed a shift from having a moderate head of the state to now a new hardliner head of the state. So with the rise of a new hardliner head of the state, the policy of Iran in the Middle East is likely to improve, in the sense that it is going to become more hardlined, and at the same time it's going to influence different countries in a more aggressive way. So this is what I was trying to tell you, friends, that Iran being here as a country today has an influence on Syria. You know, Syria is basically ruled by the house of Assad. We have Bashar al-Assad today, his father Hafiz al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad, they belong to the house of Assad. They are basically Alawis. So Assad family is an Alawi. And Alawis are basically a sect of Shias. So friends, I hope you know this very basic difference, that Iran is a Shia dominated country, whereas the Saudi Arabians are a Sunni dominated country. So these are two different sects in Islam that you need to keep in mind. So because Alawis are a sect of Shias, therefore it's very natural for Iran to have a deeper influence in Syria. So कई बार आप न्यूज़ में ये देखते होंगे कि ईरान का दबदबा सीरिया में ज़्यादा है. So don't get confused by all this. Understand, wherever you have a Sunni regime, the influence of the Sunnis will be higher, whereas wherever you have a Shia regime, the influence of Shias would be higher. Similarly, friends, if you take the case of Iraq, Iraq is a Shia dominated country. It has more than 65% of the population which are Shias. So obviously the influence of Iran in Iraq is going to be much, much higher. Now, at the same time, it's interesting to know, as I will explain you in the subsequent slides, that Iran also apparently has a very unique policy where not only they have a deep influence over the Shias, obviously because they are no doubt the leader of the Shia world, but Iran also has, for that matter, a deep influence over certain Sunnis. And we'll talk about those Sunnis very importantly after some time. Now, I want you to understand the situation of Iraq post 2003. If you look at Iraq before 2003, Iraq was basically ruled by a person called Saddam Hussein. Friends, Saddam Hussein was basically a Sunni ruler. And as I told you just some time ago, that Iraq is a Shia majority country. So you have majority of the people who are in Iraq Shias, whereas the minorities are a Sunni. Saddam Hussein apparently was a Sunni leader. So you see, what was the peculiar case of Iraq? The peculiar case of Iraq was that there was a Sunni minority ruler ruling over the Shia majority population. So obviously the Sunni minority ruler had suppressed the Shias. The Shias were not very happy with the regime of Saddam Hussein. However, he had completely kept their ambitious approaches under control. Now what happened is that in 2003, US invaded Iraq. Now why did US invade Iraq and all, we can have a separate discussion on that at a later stage, but it's not required right now. So in 2003, US invaded Iraq, and when they invaded Iraq, their objective was basically to remove Saddam Hussein. So US basically removed Saddam Hussein. Now friends, when US removed Saddam Hussein, the Sunni minority ruler ruling over the Shia majority was removed. So obviously now what will happen? The balance here between the Shias and the Sunnis gets disturbed. So obviously after the US invasion, the Shias now apparently became more powerful than the Sunnis. And if the Shias become more powerful than the Sunnis, then obviously the immediate country that is going to gain benefit out of it is going to be Iran. Why? Because as I just told you, that Iran is a Shia dominated country. So because it's a prominent Shia fountainhead of the world today, Iranian influence began to rise. So today, Iran basically has established their hegemony over Iraq through different kind of militias. These are basically non-state actors. These are basically non-state actor groups that they have created. And these non-state actor groups that they have created with respect to Iraq include a group like Saraya al-Khorsani, Asaib al-Haq and Kataib Hezbollah. These are three groups that they have created with respect to controlling Iraq. So basically Iran is able to have influence over Iraq today since 2003, when the balance has been tilted in favor of the Shias, and they have created these powerful militias to keep a check on the territory of Iraq. Now, also, what is the larger game of Iran in Iraq? Let's try to understand that, friends. In Iraq, as I just told you, that we have a Shia majority population. So there are a lot of Shia religious sites, and these religious sites which are there in Iraq obviously have tremendous influence and importance for Iran as well, because these are Shia sites and they are religious sites. So Iran basically has one of their first objective of basically protecting these religious sites. So protection of religious sites, which are the Shia sites, is one of the most important objective of Iran in Iraq. The second thing is that Iraq is one of the very large oil producers. And being a very large oil producer, Iran also wants to enter into the oil politics. Iran also has an ambition to basically control the oil politics that is being played by Iraq today, because this gives Iran a huge amount of economic leverage. बात सिंपल है दोस्तों, आप समझिए इस चीज़ को. इराक के पास बहुत सारा तेल है और अगर वो तेल का कंट्रोल ईरान को मिल जाए किसी तरीके से तो ईरान का लीवरेज ऑटोमेटिकली बढ़ जाता है. और कौन सा लीवरेज यहाँ पे दोस्तों? इट्स द इकोनॉमिक लीवरेज. So that's the important point to keep in mind. Now, apart from the control of oil, it's also important to understand another thing here, friends. So see this map very carefully. So here Iran is located, This is the Strait of Hormuz. This is the place from where a lot of oil trade occurs. So all those countries that basically buy oil, they basically use this route. So this route of sea from where they buy oil is also at times known as the strategic sea route. Why it is known as a strategic sea route is because primarily from here we buy a lot of oil. Not just we in India, but even the Chinese and the other Asian countries like the South Koreans, etc. A lot of them buy oil from here. So if all the oil passes from here and this area is located close to Iran, so obviously it's very natural that Iran will basically try to exert certain influence here. And if Iran is able to exert influence here, then they can not only dominate the area of Gulf of Oman but also the Persian Gulf, because anybody who enters this area and anybody who leaves this area will have to have some kind of an Iranian influence here. So Iran basically has this larger game that it wants to play a game of basically also controlling the vital sea routes or the strategic sea routes. That has to be kept in mind. So if you broadly look at the Iranian influence today, as I told you friends some time ago, Iran is a Shia country, and a unique policy that they have adopted is that they have basically engaged not only with the Shias but also with the Sunnis. Whereas if you look at the case of, say for example, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, as I just told you, is a fountainhead of the Sunni Islam or the Sunni world. The Saudi Arabians have always engaged only with the Sunnis. This is where Iran happens to gain, friends, because Iran not only exerts their influence over the Shias but also over the Sunnis. For example, today, Taliban is a group in Afghanistan, and this group in Afghanistan today is a Sunni dominated group, and this Sunni group called Taliban is basically financed in a very big way by the Iranians as such. So they have a deep influence over the Talibanis. Similarly, Hamas, I just told you that they have a destabilizing presence in the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip is basically a group called as Hamas. Hamas was created in 1987. It was created to oppose the creation of Israel. They receive a lot of funding from the Iranians today. Even this group is a Sunni dominated group. And as I told you, they have a direct influence in Iraq. They have a direct influence in Yemen, where they are fighting a war with the Saudi Arabians. And also at the same time in Syria, as I told you, in the case of House of Assad. And specifically Bashar al-Assad, who belongs to the Alawi sect, which is a subsect of the Shia Islam. Now, even though Iran basically has these larger ambitions of becoming, a hegemonic power, there are certain hurdles in this Iranian influence. So you see, as I just told you, friends, in the previous slides, that Iran wants to basically control the oil. Iran wants to play a game in Afghanistan. They want to play a game in Iraq. They want to play a game even in Yemen and Syria, and they support Hamas, thereby, indirectly supporting the Gaza Strip against the Israelis. So Iran basically has a game against Israel for that matter here as well. But how do you exert all this influence without any hurdle? But the first question is that for that you have to mitigate these hurdles. What are these hurdles? The first hurdle is basically the political power expansion. See, today, as I told you, friends, there are areas which are directly under the control of Iran, where they have a remote controlled presence. They include basically, as I told you, Syria, Lebanon and Iraq. So here Iran basically has no problem, friends, because these areas are directly under the control of Iran as such. But today, as I told you, let me take you back to the first slide where I showed you this. So today it has a destabilizing role here. So it is in these areas, friends, where Iran wants to expand their political influence. आप बात को समझिए. These are areas which are directly under the control of Iran. Here Iran manipulates everything, manages everything. These are areas which are basically, we can say, potential areas of Iranian influence, where Iran wants to extend this arc of influence. So how does it engage with these countries so that it is able to engage and expand? This is one of the hurdle today. Similarly, there is an economic hegemonic hurdle. You see, when you want to undertake these kind of goals, let me again take you back. So you have a direct control here. Obviously, if you have a direct control here, don't forget the fact that, friends, Iran must be spending a lot of money here. And obviously, if you have a destabilizing role in these 4 states, you will also be spending a lot of money here. And if you have an ambition to expand your power here because you perceive them as potential states, you would also need money here. So the question here is, how does Iran get money? Iran has a problem in accessing money. Why? Because today Iran is already under the American sanctions, and these sanctions have been imposed upon Iran primarily because of their nuclear deal. In my international relations book, I have explained the nuclear deal in 2 pages. I don't want to go into the aspects of that. You can just have a reading of that. You will get a complete idea about what the Iranian nuclear deal is. Why did Iran go nuclear? So in a 2-page itself, you will get a crisp content that will help you to understand the concept. So Iran basically is under the US sanctions. Because of the US sanctions, it's not able to access money from different countries. Iran has a lot of resources. One of the very important resources that they have is not only oil, but the other resource that they have is called natural gas. So Iran wants to basically sell these resources. When you sell these resources, you will get money. But the question is, how do you sell when you are under basically sanctions? So this is a problem. So basically the larger hurdle, if I put it in one word for Iran and Iranian ambition, is what? Money. Are you able to understand this? The biggest hurdle for Iran in achieving its any ambition today is basically access of money. It's not that Iranians don't have resource. They have a lot of resource. They have oil, they have natural gas. Isko bech ke they can earn a lot of money. But the problem is, sir, that how do you get money at a time when you are under the larger American sanctions? No country is willing to give you money. No country is willing to trade with you for the fear of American sanctions. अब आप इस चीज़ को बहुत ध्यान से समझिए जो मैं आपको बोल रहा हूँ. As I said, I'll repeat this point. No country is interested to engage with Iran for the fear of American sanctions. Countries ईरान से आज की डेट में अमेरिका के sanctions के तहत डर रही हैं. So if there is a possibility of countries having a fear of sanctions from America by engaging with Iran, then the question arises, which countries can engage with Iran? Obviously those countries that do not have this fear of sanctions. And now try to think, please apply your mind. Which are those countries in the world which do not fear the American sanctions? Which are those countries in the world which want to basically do something to, even for that matter, if given an opportunity, counter the Americans in their sanctions? Yes, you guessed it right, my friends. It's none other but Chinese. None other but the Russians. So there's a larger Russia-China proximity happening, and all of these three are coming together now to undercut the Americans. Let's see this further. This is where I said, friends, the red star comes as a rescue of Iran. This is where this man Xi Jinping, देखिए कितना मुस्कुरा रहा है, ये मुस्कुराने की बात नहीं है चाचा. So this guy Xi Jinping has basically recently signed a 25-year agreement with Iran. And this agreement that they have recently signed with Iran matters a lot primarily because of one simple reason, that in this agreement, China wants to undertake not only economic development of Iran, but they also want to undertake security, and they want to undertake strategic development of Iran. So again, I want you to think about this. If the world is concerned about not engaging with Iran because of the American sanctions, which countries are going to think about engaging with Iran? Obviously those countries that do not fear the American sanctions. This is where this entire block comes into play, and that's why China has emerged as a rescuer of Iran today. So not only China gains by engaging with Iran, as we will see, Iran will also gradually gain by engaging with the Chinese. So there's a 25-year agreement deal which covers economy, security, strategic issues, it covers defense, and very importantly it also covers development of Iran. So you see, this is a very comprehensive deal, and this deal is comprehensive, and why it matters is because it covers every aspect by which US has been trying to isolate Iran today. So if the Americans tried to isolate Iran basically by imposing sanctions upon them economically, then China came as a rescue here. If today, because of the American sanctions, they tried to prevent any security strategic cooperation, China came as a rescue here. Today, China is interested in providing defense support and developmental support. So Iran is gradually emerging as a new hedge for China. And why it is emerging as a new hedge for China is because today the Chinese also happen to buy a lot of oil from the Middle East. And obviously if they also happen to buy oil from the Middle East, don't forget, I have deliberately put this map again here, friends. If China wants to buy oil, it will also come here and buy the oil and take it from here to China. So China will make an entry into this area, China will make an exit of this area. So that means Chinese presence here is very high today because China has been buying a lot of oil. So China is involved in Persian Gulf, China is involved in Strait of Hormuz, China is involved in the Gulf of Oman. So this is where the game for China also lies and the game for Iran also lies. What is the game here? Today, under this 25-year agreement that I just told you here, under this agreement there's a provision that the Chinese are going to deploy 5,000 troops on the Iranian soil. This is the first ever time that on the Iranian soil there are going to be 5,000 troops of a foreign country, because since 1979 Iranian revolution, Iran has resisted any presence of foreign troops. But this is the first time that we are going to have 5,000 troops on the Iranian soil by the Chinese here. So why is China doing this? Because obviously, again, let me take you back to this map. If there are 5,000 troops standing in this area here, which I am scribbling, if you see this area where 5,000 troops are here, then obviously these troops can keep a watch upon this area, the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. So they can ensure what is called as security of strategic waters. I hope you are understanding this, that by presence of troops the Chinese will be able to ensure security of strategic waters. And also at the same time, let's not forget friends, the 25-year deal provides economic plus development support to Iran, and this economic and development support will help Iran to achieve that economic hegemony that it wants to achieve. That is what I just told you some time back, that one of the hurdle is where will the money come from. The money will now come from China, friends. So here what is happening now, the Chinese and the Iranians have come together to undercut the Americans at large. The objective here is to enhance the bilateral security profile. That means basically undertake China-Iran security engagement. So deeper China-Iran security engagement will mean what? A threat to the American presence. Why? Because obviously the Americans are trying to undercut Iran. And obviously now Americans have another player to undercut, that is China. And Americans will now have another player to undercut at large if the third party also joins, which is Russia. So thereby this entire block of Russia, China, Iran is going to emerge as a new headache for the Americans today. And this entire proximity of China and Iran will also help us to build a new narrative of Iran. Today, the Americans basically are trying to tell the entire world that Iranians are basically people who live in poverty. They are hungry people, poor people. Why? Because they are affected by sanctions. But if Chinese start engaging with the Iranians and a lot of money starts flowing in, then this narrative that Iran is basically a poverty-stricken country will basically change, because money will bring about what is called as prosperity. So there is not only a threat to what is called as the American presence in the Middle East, but there is also a threat to the American narrative on Iran that they had built. And this narrative is likely to change in the near future from poverty to prosperity is a point you need to remember. So how rebuilding devastated states are likely to help the Chinese? You see, this is where another thing I want you to understand. Let me take you back again, friends, to the map that I just showed you. Okay, so here, if you see, as I said, Iran has a direct influence in Yemen. Yemen is a country which has been destroyed because of a proxy war. As I told you that, in Yemen, the Iranians are basically fighting the Saudi Arabians. Saudi Arabians are the neighbors. Iranians are supporting groups in Yemen. They are fighting. So Yemen is basically a devastated country. Now what happens is that Iran is a country that has a deep influence on Yemen. Iran ka influence hai Yemen pe. So because Iran has a deep influence on Yemen, what will happen is that this devastated country will one day be rebuilt. Once the war stops, this proxy war that is going on. And this rebuilding is the time when Iranian influence will pave way for the Chinese companies to come. This is what I need you to understand. Iraq has been a devastated country. Iraq was invaded by the Americans in 2003. Since 2003, there has been a crisis going on in Iraq. Iraq is a devastated country. Iraq has to be rebuilt. Who has an influence on Iraq? It's Iran. If Iran has an influence on Iraq, who will get the upper edge to basically do the development in Iraq? It's again the Iranians. And if the Iranians are going to gain an edge, do the Iranians have the capability to do development? Answer is no. Why? Because they lack money. So who gives them the money now to do this development? That is China. So if China basically gives them money to do this development, it's a new game for China to play here. Please try to understand, by engaging with Iran, what I am trying to tell you is that China is able to enlarge its profile in the Middle East. Are you understanding this? That by engaging with Iran, China is getting an opportunity to build those countries which have been devastated by the proxy wars supported by the Americans directly or indirectly. Syria is a devastated country since the 2011 Arab Spring. सीरिया में वॉर चल रही है, सीरिया में लोग जो है रेफ्यूजी क्राइसिस हो रहा है, सब कुछ हो रहा है, एंड ईरान हैज़ अ डायरेक्ट इन्फ्लुएंस ऑन सीरिया. So Syria will undertake rebuilding soon. Whenever Syria undertakes rebuilding soon, who will indirectly help Iran to do this rebuilding? The Chinese. So this is where the larger game is, friends. This is what you need to understand. That Iran has become the new focal point today for China in Middle East. So basically that is what I just told you some time back as a point which now I hope should become clear to you. That this is why I say Iran is becoming the new hedge for China. That today China is basically emerging as a new player in the Middle East by helping rebuild the devastated states, and also tomorrow once they are able to rebuild these devastated states, China will basically look at them as potential Belt and Road Initiative players also. So not only there is a magnification of Chinese profile in the Middle East, China is also going to use this narrative in the future to basically motivate these states to become a part of the BRI. So what is USA trying to do? Obviously US is not going to keep shut. They will definitely do something. So what is USA trying to do is that they have adopted a strategy called the subletting diplomatic strategy. What is subletting diplomatic strategy? It means that US basically is an umbrella. So under this umbrella, what is USA trying to do? They are basically creating an alliance of the Jews and the Sunnis. So the most important ally of the Americans, the Jewish ally in the Middle East, is what? Israel, that we all know. So today the Americans are engaging with Israel, and they are telling the Israel to further engage with the Sunnis. See, this is what is called subletting. That I am here, I have a house, and in this house I have a room. I sublet that room to somebody to live in. आप समझ रहे, जिसको हम पीजी कहते हैं, कि आप पेइंग गेस्ट हैं हमारे घर में, हम अंकल आंटी भी वहीं रह रहे हैं, लड़का भी वहीं रह रहा है, वो लड़का आपका एकदम बेटा बन के रह रहा है साथ में, पर वो बेटे से भी गया गुजरा निकला, वो एक अलग बात है. सो यहाँ पर भी वही चीज़ हो रही है. That US is not directly playing a role. US is only guiding. This is called providing strategic guidance. So US is today under the subletting diplomatic strategy providing strategic guidance to the Israelis. And they are telling Israelis that you talk to the Sunnis. After all, the Sunnis never liked the Israelis, the Jews. But somehow now they have understood that if we don't like them and if we are left alone, then eventually one day will come when the Shias will start liking the Jews. And that will undertake our isolation. So it's better that we engage with the Jews rather than letting them engage with them. So ये US कर रहा है. They are telling Israel to engage with the Sunnis. So what's the road ahead? The road ahead, friends, is very simple and clear. Today US basically not only wants to counter the Chinese, counter the Iranians, but they also have to counter the Chinese. And to counter the Chinese and the Iranians, they have to make sure that Russia does not end up in supporting both of them, because Russia is very capable of doing that. Russia is already a good friend of Iran. Russia is already a good friend of China. So as a result of which these three, if they come together, then it's going to create trouble for the Americans. So the road ahead is basically to limit Iranian influence. The road ahead is not only to limit the Iranian influence but also the Chinese influence in the Middle East. Because please try to understand, China is going to use Iran to basically enhance their presence in the Middle East. And I have explained you how. So the future of the Middle East is very clear, sir. We are now going to have a new player apart from the Shia, Sunnis and the Jews who have always dominated the Middle East. And the new player this time now is going to be the Chinese. And how the Chinese are going to play their game is going to define the future of the Middle East. So I hope you are able to understand. This is a question at the end of it just for you to think about it, that the growing Sino-Iranian or Chinese-Iranian bonhomie could weaken the US hegemony in the Middle East, analyzed in the light of the contemporary dynamics at play in Middle East. So such kind of a question in international relations can be asked. So I hope this understanding has helped you to think about these things which are going on. So in the subsequent video, friends, the next topic for discussion next week is going to be a video on the New Atlantic Charter 2021 and rise of new competitive diplomacy. Sorry for the spelling mistake here. So this is the next topic that we shall be discussing next time. So I hope the things are very clear to you. Thank you.